Virtual Console seemed to be a mainstay for Nintendo after it came into this world with the Wii. It was a method for re-releasing hundreds of games from consoles of the past, whether they were made by Nintendo or not. It wasn't perfect. Many popular games were never released on Virtual Console. Sometimes the emulation was bad. Occasionally, Virtual Console games would even end up being delisted for one reason or another, becoming impossible to obtain. Despite all of these things, the Virtual Console service was very good. It allowed people to play older games on newer hardware that they used more often. They were able to actually own the games and play them in convenient ways. It even introduced me to some of my favorite games like Paper Mario. Naturally, Nintendo would want to bring the Virtual Console service back for the Switch, right? I mean, why wouldn't they? People have criticized the Nintendo Switch Online service many times before, and it really does deserve a lot of that criticism. Online play in Nintendo games wasn't good before, but we didn't have to pay for it at least. Then this service launched and everything changed for the worse. Despite the fact that we have to pay for it now, it's just as bad as it was before. Heck, it's even worse sometimes. They've advertised that Switch Online members get amazing benefits, but they really aren't that good. There's a lame mobile app that lets you do pretty pointless stuff in Smash, Animal Crossing, Splatoon, and that's pretty much it as far as I'm aware. Well, there is one other thing. The lame mobile app is the only way to use voice chat for most Switch games, but you have to be willing to do something really stupid to get it working. I legitimately want to know if there's somebody that has seriously tried to do this. There are some other perks. You can use these game voucher things that let you pay a little less to download games. This is actually pretty nice, but for some reason they decided to discontinue the game vouchers for North America at some point in time for some reason. They made them available again recently, but they've never disappeared from other regions, so I don't know why they got rid of them for a time. You can get new user icons, I guess. I actually kind of like this. It's a little pointless, but it's fun, and it's the only way we would have ever gotten icons for games like Xenoblade. You can also play a few NSO exclusive games like Tetris 99, and that's nice. And then we have the not Virtual Console. Yeah, pretty much everybody has complained about the NSO classic games at some point. I definitely have my fair share of problems with them too. They're honestly not terrible and you kind of get what you're paying for, but that doesn't mean the classic games are free of criticism. I have many gripes with the service, and even though I don't feel like it's a scam or anything like that, it's still very lacking, and I want it to be better. So, it's time to complain. It's actually not bad. Well, most of the time at least. No, really, it's much better overall than it was on Wii U. I'd say for the most part it's on the same level as the emulation of the Virtual Console on Wii. NES games on the Wii U had this awful dark filter that just made them look really ugly and even hard to see at times. NES games on other systems weren't like this, so I don't know why the Wii U had to be different in a bad way. Thankfully, NES games on the Switch look as they should, no black filter or anything. Moving on to the selections for other consoles, the Super Nintendo games run pretty well and are faithful representations of the original games. That could be said for all of the other systems that have had Super NES Virtual Console, so it's not too big of a surprise, but it's still nice. The Game Boy emulation is pretty good. It even lets you choose between using a black and white filter, a green filter, or a color filter. The 3DS only let you choose between the green and monochrome ones. It defaulted to monochrome, and I think the green filter was activated with a weird button combo, so I'm glad that they streamlined that a little bit. The 3DS style of doing things did make it possible to switch filters on the fly though, so we did lose something of value. The color option is nice, and it looks pretty good in games like Metroid 2. In other games though, it ends up looking pretty weird. Mario Land 2 doesn't look too bad, but there's something off about it. Kirby's Dream Land is kind of funny, but in a painful way. Like, what the heck is this, and what is that? Anyway, now it's time to talk about the Nintendo 64. This may not go very well. Nintendo 64 games on the Wii U had some big emulation issues, including a dark filter. I'm pretty sure this was for seizure prevention, but they could have just, I don't know, gotten rid of flashing lights in games that had them. The dark filter is not a necessary way to prevent seizures. It legitimately ruins the look of the games and makes them harder to navigate in some situations. You may know that the Switch definitely did not have very good 64 emulation at launch, but at least it didn't have the dark filter. That definitely doesn't excuse the problems, though. I believe the NSO emulators were handled by a relatively new team with little to no experience working with Nintendo 64 games. The N64 is also notorious for having weird technology and being hard to develop emulators for, so that would explain why the problems were there at launch. And those problems were kind of big. There were many issues like the fog not working the way it should in games like Ocarina of Time and Mario Kart, random crashes in Paper Mario, the Invisiboss and Yoshi's Story not properly turning invisible, input lag in most games, a random softlock in Kirby 64, the infamous Dark Link Room visual bugs, and more. Most of these issues have thankfully been fixed. I don't think they should have been there at launch, but the games feel much better now. Ocarina of Time was a little insufferable at launch, but now I'm pretty sure it works just fine. The input lag is a lot better, and playing Ocarina music is a lot less painful. They even went out of their way to fix the Dark Link Room. Some things haven't been addressed as quickly, though. One thing that's been ignored is the issue of stick sensitivity. To my understanding, the dead zone of the N64 controller's stick doesn't match up with that of any modern controller, and Nintendo didn't do anything to fix that, so even a small tilt to the left stick will cause the game to act as if you pushed it almost all the way. One major problem caused by this is the ridiculous increase in difficulty for shooting minigames in Majora's Mask, among other things. This was a problem on Wii, Wii U, and even GameCube, so I don't expect it to be fixed, but we could still complain and things might change. That's not the only problem, though. The Yoshi's Story Invisiboss was not fixed until this year. Paper Mario still has some big problems. For some reason they added code that causes the game to have a lot of lag at some random points. I don't know why. I think they did something like this for Banjo-Kazooie and Majora's Mask as well, but that was for cutscenes only, and there was a reason for them to add some amount of slowdown to those games. Paper Mario, on the other hand, has no reason as far as I'm aware to just spike in lag at any point. The three places where the lag is most noticeable are the pause screen, the game over cutscene, and the lava piranha fight. That last one is especially a problem because it messes up the timing for action commands and it just looks really bad. They still haven't done anything about this, so please complain more. The biggest thing that they haven't addressed with these games is probably the issue of controller packs. The original N64 controller had a slot where you could put these little accessories that will let you do a variety of things depending on what you put in. The Switch just doesn't support this. I'm pretty sure that controller pack support was discovered in a data mine for the app, so they could probably add it, but they haven't. Will they ever actually implement it? Maybe one day, but they didn't on Wii or Wii U, so I don't think so, unfortunately. Without this, you can't save and win back. I guess you can use save states instead, but you shouldn't have to. You also can't save time trial ghosts in Mario Kart 64, which is pretty stupid. Perhaps the biggest use of controller packs was the ability to transfer Pokémon from the Game Boy games to the Pokémon Stadium games. Not having this feature kind of defeats the entire purpose of that series. It was advertised as a way to take your Pokémon from Game Boy and bring them into 3D on the big screen, and the transfer pack is literally advertised on the box, which you can clearly see in the app, but now you're just stuck with the default Pokémon, which takes a lot away from the experience. I've heard that the default ones are pretty bad too, which makes the Pokémon Stadium games feel like a waste of an addition to the service. In spite of those things that haven't been addressed, the N64 emulation is probably as good or even sometimes better than it was on Wii, which is previously the gold standard for official N64 emulation. It's come a long way, and even though it shouldn't have ever been as bad as it was at launch and it's still lacking, I can't really be too mad about it. Moving on from that, Genesis emulation for NSO is apparently much better than the emulation for the many different collections that have Genesis games. There are definitely plenty of ways to play a lot of the games that they included, but it's nice to know that these are the best official ways to play them on Switch, I guess. I'm not very familiar with Genesis games, so I don't really know what to say. And then there's the GBA emulator, and pretty much everybody agrees that it's great. I'm not surprised because it was pretty good on Wii U as well, but I'm glad that they didn't mess this one up. Overall, the emulation is good, aside from a few significant problems that the N64 games still have. I will admit that I'm not the most knowledgeable on this subject, so there is a real chance that I'm very wrong on this. Go ahead and let me know if that's the case. This is certainly a selection of games. There are indeed games. They can be played, but are there games that should not be played? How about the games that should be played that aren't available? Was it fair for them to add Rival Turf and not Super Mario RPG? Where on earth is Hit Game Urban Champion? Will they ever add— No. No. They just won't. This section may be a bit long, so you can go ahead and skip forward to the next one if you get bored. I'll just start with the N64 games. Currently we have a solid amount of games on Switch. A lot of the most popular games on the system are present, and we have some games that skipped both the Wii and Wii U libraries like Winback, Pokemon Stadium, the first Mario Party, and Pilotwings 64. We even have some big surprises like Banjo-Kazooie making its first reappearance on a Nintendo console in years, and GoldenEye making its first reappearance on anything since the N64. Mario Party 3, 1080 Snowboarding, and Harvest Moon 64 have been confirmed, although Harvest Moon has only been confirmed for Japan. Maybe it will show up eventually though. The SNES Harvest Moon game was also Japan exclusive for a while there, but they added it worldwide in a recent update. Just looking at the libraries on Wii and Wii U, there are some other games that haven't shown up yet. Donkey Kong 64, Cruisin' USA, Smash 64, Bomberman 64, Bomberman Hero, and Ogre Battle 64 have not been confirmed, and I don't know if they will be. I think we can at least expect Donkey Kong to show up at some point down the line, but I'm not so sure about the rest. Looking outside of previous game libraries, people have been hoping for a bunch of classic rare titles to show up. I don't think we'll see Conker and Perfect Dark because they're rated M, and I don't think that Nintendo wants an app that has Mario in it to carry an M rating, but we might possibly see Diddy Kong Racing, Jet Force Gemini, Blast Corps, Banjo-Tooie, and maybe even Killer Instinct Gold. One thing that would be cool to see would be Dinosaur Planet. I know it was never released, but I think it was mostly finished and a ROM of it leaked online, so maybe? They've released Star Fox 2 and the English localization of the first Mother game years after they were cancelled, so there is a very small chance that other unreleased projects will show up if they are mostly finished. I don't think Nintendo realizes how cool and valuable stuff like that would be though, so probably not. There are some other first-party things they could add. There's the 64DD content, which does exist, but there isn't much of it. Doshin the Giant was the main 64DD game, but they'd probably want to save that for a potential GameCube app since it got a port for GameCube and was localized. Same thing for Animal Crossing, but Japan may see that one since it was not a DD game. Then there are a bunch of games owned by third-party developers that aren't rare. Stuff like Rayman 2, Mischief Makers, the Star Wars games, the Mystical Ninja games, the Castlevania games even though they're apparently not good, the Tetris games, Mega Man 64 maybe, Glover, the Bomberman 64 sequel, the Toy Story 2 video game, Gex. Running out of ideas here. A lot of these games would actually be really great to see, but the N64 didn't have a ton of games that the average person would really get excited about, so I doubt many of these will be added, but I long for the day where the random shovelware and obscure platformers of the N64 will be released again. As we move on to the consoles with actual libraries, it's probably worth figuring out if Nintendo will end up releasing games on NSO if they are already on Switch. The answer is yes, maybe. You see, in 2019, Nintendo remade Link's Awakening from the ground up and sold it for $60. You'd think this would mean that they wouldn't put the original or DX versions on NSO, but they did put Link's Awakening DX on the Game Boy app, which has almost all of the content from the $60 remake. There is a possibility that they added Link's Awakening DX because it's different enough from the remake, but I don't know. It's all just speculation at this point. I do believe that this is probably the case though. How would this affect the games that they choose to put on NSO? Well, they might for instance add Metroid Prime to a GameCube app because the remaster's better graphics and control options could act as a sort of selling point to the NSO subscribers that can already play the game. Conversely, they probably wouldn't add the Pikmin games because the Switch ports aren't too different from the originals on GameCube. What I do know is that they're definitely willing to have multiple versions of one game across different apps. I mean, we have multiple versions of Mario 1, 2, 2 USA, 3, and World, so we'll probably be seeing stuff like Metroid Zero Mission and maybe even Four Swords. Regarding third parties, most of them seem to be perfectly fine releasing things on NSO if they aren't available elsewhere on the Switch. Capcom, for example, has many collections for Street Fighter, Mega Man, and more, so we don't see any of those games as a part of the base subscription. There are games in those series on Genesis, and those are included as a part of the expansion pack tier, so that may be an exception. I believe that this is also the case for the likes of Konami and Bandai Namco. Sega, on the other hand, seems to just be adding whatever they feel like adding, which is cool, I guess. The only exception seems to be Sonic, maybe? We only have Sonic 2 and Sonic Spinball, so maybe they're just trying to justify Origins or something. And then we have Square Enix. They have no games on NSO. Absolutely none. Not one single game. And it's not because they've already released most of their games on Switch. It is true that they're selling quite a few of their classic games on the eShop, stuff like the Mana Collection, the old Dragon Quest games, the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters, and more. There are so many games that they don't seem to have any interest in porting to Switch that aren't on Switch Online though. Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest 4, 5, and 6, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, Ogre Battle 64, and more are nowhere to be found on Switch and will likely not be ported anytime soon, so I don't know why they don't just add them to NSO. The biggest problem with this is probably the fact that Super Mario RPG is nowhere to be found. The original version at least. We're thankfully getting a full remake later this year, and I'm really looking forward to playing that. It's still unfortunate that we won't be able to play the original game on this system, but oh well. This game's situation isn't too bad anymore. I guess I kind of respect Square for realizing that NSO is not an amazing way to preserve and sell games, but I actually don't respect them at all because putting their games on NSO is a better way to preserve their games than just leaving them to sit on their original consoles stuck there for eternity. I think that's probably enough of that. Outside of some of the missing third-party games, almost everything big from the NES selections on previous consoles is here. Some first-party games are missing though. Duck Hunt, Wild Gunman, and Hogan's Alley were on Wii U. They'd have to add gyro controls to get those to work, but I mean, why not? A couple of other games are missing. Star Tropics 2 is not there, and it's kind of weird that they've taken this long. The mysterious Murasame Castle is also not present. This one was Japan only for a long time, but it's not a text-heavy game, and it did get a worldwide release on the 3DS eShop. It's also a pretty cool game, so I hope it shows up one day. And even though this is on the Japan-only side, Fire Emblem Gaiden is not on NSO yet. That's it, I think. If I missed something big, feel free to tell me how dumb I am. Shoot, I forgot about Urban Champion. How could I forget about Urban Champion? I guess it's time to move on to the Super Nintendo then. I previously mentioned all of the Square Enix games. There may be a chance for Super Mario RPG as a sort of promotional thing for the remake, but I have no faith for anything else. SimCity is a bit of a weird one. It was developed and published by Nintendo, but I think another company owns the rights to the game and the series. It was released on Wii, but it was delisted in 2013 and hasn't shown up again since then. I doubt it will show up, but it would be a nice addition. The Legend of the Mystical Ninja was on Wii, Wii U, and 3DS, but it's not on Switch at all. It might show up considering how Konami's handled NSO, but I don't know. And then, once again on the Japan side only, Fire Emblem Trakia 776 is not on NSO. I have probably missed a lot here. I'll skip the Genesis games because I'm not too familiar with them, and I won't go too in-depth with the Game Boy and GBA games, but I do want to mention them. They obviously only came out, 8 months ago, I really shouldn't have waited so long to make this video. At the moment, we have no idea what games with worldwide releases are coming next, while The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls has been confirmed for Japan only and will likely not come to the West. They are definitely taking their sweet time though. Beyond that, there are other games missing. Mario Land 1 and Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, Wario Land 1 and 2, Kicks, the first two Game & Watch Gallery games, the Mario Sports games, Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters, the Donkey Kong Land games, the multitude of Kirby spin-offs. There's a lot that they should add. Of course, the biggest games that they could add are the Pokemon games. Red, Green, Blue, Yellow, Gold, Silver, and Crystal would all convince a lot of people to subscribe if they haven't already, and I don't know why they're waiting. It's probably just a lame Pokemon Company thinks. They might be confirmed in a Pokemon Presents sometime down the line, and that would be nice, but I don't know. Now we end with the GBA. Currently we have a measly 11 games, with 3 more being confirmed for worldwide release. These are F-Zero Maximum Velocity, Golden Sun, and Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. We have a lot of work to do here. They should add Wario Land 4, Kirby Nightmare and Dreamland, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones, Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, Metroid Zero Mission, Golden Sun The Lost Age, Game & Watch Gallery 4, Mario vs. Donkey Kong, WarioWare Twisted, Zelda A Link to the Past and Four Swords, Drill Dozer, the Mario Sports games, the other F-Zero games, and probably more. And now we have to talk about third-party games. There were multiple Klonoa GBA games that were on Wii U that might show up if Nintendo decides that adding games such as Snail's Pace is a bad idea. The Mega Man Zero games might show up, but I think they're in a collection, so I wouldn't count on it, and you should probably just buy the collection if you want to play them. Same thing goes for the GBA Castlevania games. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance might be doomed because of Square Enix, but there might be a chance. The GBA version of Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories would be cool to see, especially since it's never been re-released and most agree that the PS2 remake is not as interesting. The GBA emulator for NSO was leaked a year or so ago, and that was one of the games that was tested, but that might not be a sign of anything. The game may be doomed because of Square, but Disney might have the final say, or Square might actually be nice for once. That's it for the current selection of games and the things that they could or should add. I probably missed a lot, but I'm tired and I give up. They have done some pretty cool things though, so it's not all missed potential. We have multiple games that were never released outside of Japan, multiple games that haven't been on any Nintendo consoles in a long time, and even a couple of games that have never been released at all before. Hands down though, one of the coolest things that they've done with Switch Online was bringing GoldenEye back. This was a classic on the N64 and is one of the most influential FPSs of all time. It was a licensed James Bond game though, so there was no hope for its return. Both Nintendo and Microsoft tried for years to bring it back, whether it was through Rare Replay, the Xbox Live Arcade, or the Wii Virtual Console, but it never worked out. Then, in September of 2022, they confirmed that it would be coming to NSO and Xbox. This is still pretty weird, but in a good way. The game has definitely not aged very well in some areas, but it's great to have it here. Hopefully we get more stuff like this in the future. Now it's time to complain some more. Honestly, this is my biggest problem with the service right now. They don't release these games in a very timely manner. At all. I think the best way of illustrating this is to go back to the launch of this lovely and kind service when they started making us pay for the bad online instead of letting us use it for free, and the only thing they gave us in return was a worse version of Virtual Console games. Let's go back to September of 2018. So, this was kind of bad. We only had NES games, which weren't very exciting. Some of these have not aged terribly well, and they've been released so many times. We did get 20 games at launch though. In addition to those 20 games, they were adding 2 to 4 more games each month. The NES library was filling up pretty quickly and we got a lot of the heavy hitters. Then September of 2019 came and they added SNES games to the service with 20 of those games at launch. Having Super Nintendo games was nice, but we had to wait a whole year for them. This is also where things got pretty bad. Rather than adding games once a month, they slowed down. Every few months, they added 2 to 3 SNES games, which was a big downgrade from the monthly updates that the NES games got. The NES updates slowed down just as much and had less games than before on top of that. In February of 2020, they added one single Super Nintendo game, and we had to wait until May for more, where we got 3. They weren't bad additions, but some of the most popular games from the system were still missing. We waited until July, where they finally added Donkey Kong Country, which is a quintessential SNES game, and the fact that it took so long is really very depressing. In September, they added 2 new waves of games. The first was only Super Mario All-Stars, but that was still cool. Later that month, they added more games, including Donkey Kong Country 2 and the previously Japan-exclusive Mario's Super Picross. And then we suffered. December's most notable game was Donkey Kong Country 3. Then the Great Wait began. While Japan got games like Fire Emblem, Genealogy of the Holy War, and Shin Megami Tensei 2, we got Prehistoric Man and Spanky's Quest. We waited and waited for something, anything new. We hoped and prayed that a new console would be included in the subscription, or that games like Earthbound and Super Mario RPG would be added. And yet, nothing came. That was until September of 2021, 2 whole years after the SNES games were added. When September came, we got the announcement of the expansion pack with Nintendo 64 and Sega Genesis games coming as a part of the new tier. Oh boy. The expansion pack drops late in October with 15 Sega Genesis games and 9 somewhat questionably emulated N64 games. Nothing related to the service happened in November. Then December came and we got 5 more Genesis games and Paper Mario, which also had some serious emulation bugs of its own. No NES or SNES games were added this month, and we did not know how quickly they were going to add more games for the other apps. It was a very frustrating time to be a Switch Online subscriber. Things did get better though. Banjo-Kazooie was added in January, coming alongside some substantial fixes to the N64 emulation and the confirmation of Majora's Mask coming the next month. When that game was released, many of the issues that people had previously noticed had been fixed. It seemed like we finally knew what to expect for this console. One N64 game each month, which was fine because the nature of N64 emulation demanded more time for each release. The other releases were a little more scattered, but they were getting better. February also saw the long-awaited release of Earthbound and Earthbound Beginnings, bringing hope for the NES and SNES apps. Earthworm Jim was added the next month, some Genesis games were added the month after that, and so on. The N64 games continued to receive monthly releases, and the subscription finally felt like it was getting to really be worth it. Close to worth it at some point in the future, at least. Things started to slow down quite a bit though. Some major games came out for the NES and SNES services, but not a lot. The September 2022 Direct confirmed the next wave of N64 games, which included quite a few games, including GoldenEye, which was massive, but nothing released that month. The monthly schedule for N64 games continued in October, but nothing very big happened until February of this year. Nintendo finally added Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games, but the amount? Well, it was a little pathetic. We got 9 games when the Game Boy app launched, and they only confirmed 4 additional games to be coming. The next month they added 2 that weren't previously confirmed, but that's still not a lot. This is a depressingly small amount of Game Boy games, especially since the NES and SNES apps launched with 20. The N64 app had the same amount of games at launch, and those take more time and effort to get running properly. Why can't they just release more? The GBA situation is even sadder. That app launched with only 6 games. Again, the N64 app launched with 9, and they had a decent excuse for that. They added Metroid Fusion the next month and absolutely nothing else related to the expansion pack for some reason. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe the next update would have more. What am I talking about? Of course it didn't. The next month they added a mostly pointless version of Pokémon Stadium. In May they added the rest of the Super Mario Advance games, which are all ports of NES and SNES games that, as far as I know, don't have any real meaningful extra content. It's cool to have them, but we didn't get anything else. The next month we got Fire Emblem and, unsurprisingly, nothing else. I hate to say this, but I kind of miss the days where we'd get random and obscure games on the other apps. I mentioned this before and I will do it again now. GBA support was leaked almost 1 whole year prior to its release. Not only that, 39 games had been tested with the emulator. They are sitting on way more than the 6 games that they launched with, and yet they insist on releasing them at an unbearable rate. If they continue to only release one GBA or N64 game a month and continue to have scattered releases for the other apps, I don't think we're going to see all of the games that we want on the service. Nintendo will just be content to focus on their easy-to-add first-party offerings, the occasional random third-party game that nobody was really asking for, or just nothing. We may not get to see mainline Pokemon games. We may not get GameCube games anytime soon, if at all. We will not get to play more obscure games like Mischief Makers, because what's the point in adding them when they haven't added Mario Party 3 yet for some reason? Like, seriously, it was confirmed and they just dropped the other two at the same time. Why wait so long for this one? This isn't even just a problem with the game releases. We had to wait a whole year for SNES games after the service launched. Then we had to wait 2 whole years for N64 and Genesis games. After that, we had to wait around 1.5 years for the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games. At this rate, we won't see GameCube games until Nintendo's next consoles, if we even see them at all. This doesn't increase the value of the service, Nintendo. I would accept having to pay a yearly fee to continue to be able to play a lot of games that I care about. By introducing these games at a rate of 1 per month, less than 1 per month sometimes, you aren't increasing the value. You aren't getting more people to pay the entry fee by introducing something new constantly. You're just holding back. You're wasting our time and our money. You're better than this. Sorry for that. Let's complain about other things now. Literally everybody will agree that the online experience should be better. It's obviously really bad outside of the Virtual Console, but that's not what I'm here to talk about right now. Most are probably familiar with the terrible lag that N64 games would go through online. I mean, just look at it, it's awful. Nintendo obviously needs to fix their servers for online games in general. I hope that happens one day, but for now we're stuck with this. Even outside of the quality of the servers, it's just lame that you can only play with friends. That's obviously a really good option to have, and for some games it's the best option, but games like Mario Kart, GoldenEye, and others would really benefit from the ability to match up with other random players. One of the only things that the Wii U Virtual Console definitely has over the other Virtual Consoles is the ability to create custom button mappings for individual games. The Nintendo 64 games on Switch in particular would especially benefit from this. If you want to do the inputs for C up and C right, you have to use the right stick or a lame button combo, and no amount of button mapping from the system's home menu will do anything to fix this. If I could just put together my own control scheme, none of this would be a problem. It would overall just make these games more playable, and I wouldn't have to go back to the system settings menu every time I want to comfortably play GoldenEye or something like that. This might be the biggest nitpick of all time, but whatever. If you want to open one of the apps, you will have to wait for your system to connect to the internet to check if you still have a subscription. You have to do this once a week or you will not be able to play these games. So, if I open the GBA app and then went out and tried to open the N64 app while not connected to the internet, I wouldn't be able to. Or if I wanted to play a SNES game while I was out of the house but I forgot to open the app that week, I wouldn't be able to do that. I think this is very silly and they should just store the date that your subscription will expire on your system so you don't have to deal with this. This is probably a bigger nitpick, but it's one that most people have. The borders are really dumb. I'd rather have a black background. The fact that your player icon is there and you can't get rid of it is also really dumb. I'm pretty sure GoldenEye is the only game where you can get rid of the borders and the icon, but that's because there's a widescreen option that fills the empty space completely. When you pause the game, you still have to see the borders and the player icon though. Okay, this is an even bigger nitpick. The SP versions on the NES and SNES apps are stupid and clutter things up and make it hard to find the real games, and I just wish they would disappear. Yes, I know you can change the order, but have you considered the fact that I'm lazy and I don't want to do that? I do think it's silly that there isn't any way to hide the SP games. We can toggle the PAL region games on the N64 app, so why can't we turn off these glorified save states? Of course, the biggest problem with the NSO games is the fact that you actually really don't own any of them. It's nice to be able to play these games officially, but you can't do that once your subscription ends. If you want to keep playing these games, you have to keep shelling out money for this subscription. And what will happen when they're done with NSO? What if they completely discontinue the service? All the money you've spent on NSO will have gone to waste. All of the time Nintendo took to bring these games to the Switch will have gone to waste, and we'll have to completely start over with the next console. Games like GoldenEye may never see the light of day again. Right now, there's not really any way of knowing when this will happen, but it will most definitely happen someday, and that's not a very pleasant thought. I do have a potential solution. Nintendo will definitely stick to the lame subscription model, but what if they changed their minds? Here's what that could look like. Each console that is supported on NSO will have an app called NES Game Collection or N64 Game Collection or something like that. These apps will be free but empty by default. That's because you buy individual games for each app as DLC. The game will be downloaded to the console and you will be able to play the game in the app. If you have a normal Switch Online subscription, you'll be able to download most NES, SNES, or Game Boy games for free. You'll be able to play these games as much as you want, as long as you have an active subscription. You can purchase games individually as DLC as well while you have an active subscription if you want, so you can keep them for good. If you have an expansion pack subscription, you'll be able to do the same with each of the other consoles. The subscriptions would become more like Xbox Game Pass or something like that, which would be much more ideal. This could help solve the problem with the ownership of these games, as you'd have multiple options for playing these games with one being more permanent. This method could also make the game selection less limited. Square Enix would probably actually release their games. Capcom, Konami, and Bandai Namco would double dip more often. M-rated games like Conquer, Perfect Dark, and Eternal Darkness would be more likely to show up. It would just make a lot of sense and a lot of people will be happy. And it will also never happen because life is cruel. Well, we're stuck with the subscription service. Might as well talk about how it might improve later on. We are currently waiting on 2 Nintendo 64 and 3 Game Boy Advance games. I don't know when these will be released. We have no idea when the other apps will be updated either. There are some things that Nintendo could do to speed things up. If they could add 2 Nintendo 64 games each month, that would help fill out the first-party library and make room for more third-party games, because the only third-party games that we have now are Winback, which came at launch, and Banjo and GoldenEye, which are both from Rare. If they add 2 or 3 GBA games each month, we wouldn't have to wait ages for some games to be added. If they consistently updated the NES, SNES, and Game Boy apps, we wouldn't feel so defeated when they don't add the games that we keep asking for. They just need to keep the pace steady and speed things up a lot more. There are also other consoles that they could add. I think the main one people are predicting is GameCube. They did use a GameCube emulator for Mario Sunshine and 3D All-Stars, so they just have to tweak that one a bit more and we'll be good. I think GameCube emulation is simpler than N64 emulation, so we'd hopefully not have to wait as long for new games. At least that's what I hope. The GameCube actually has a lot of quality games, first party or otherwise, so adding them so slowly would be an absolute tragedy. The thing with GameCube is that they may not actually be interested in adding it to NSO. Just this year we've gotten Metroid Prime Remastered and Pikmin 1+2. Both Butt and Kaidos games are also coming soon. There's actually reason to believe we might get Metroid Prime 2 Remastered, or Switch versions of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD. We might even get other games. There were rumors about a Thousand Year Door remaster earlier this year, and after seeing what they've done with GameCube games on Switch, I would not be surprised. These releases are very popular, so Nintendo might find them to be more financially viable than their silly subscription service. Let's say, hypothetically, they actually did add GameCube games to the expansion pack. Here's what I think it could launch with. We would get 9 games at launch. These would be Super Mario Sunshine, Mario Kart Double Dash, Metroid Prime, one of the 2 Zelda games, not sure which one would come first, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Animal Crossing, Chibi Robo, just to fill our obscure Nintendo series quota, Luigi's Mansion, and Kirby Air Ride. In the months following launch, we'd get most of the popular games. Stuff like Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, Paper Mario TTYD, F-Zero GX, the Sonic games, the Star Fox games, and more. We'd also get obscure games like Custom Robo, Battalion Wars, Doshin the Giant, Cubivore, Beautiful Joe, and more. I know what you might be thinking. This is too much. They'd never add all these games that quickly. You would be right. Alright, so how about some other consoles? I wouldn't be surprised if they got TurboGrafx 16 games on here, since those were on the previous systems. I also wouldn't be too surprised if they got games from the Sega Master System and Game Gear on here as well, but those might not show up. Beyond that, we could get the Sega Saturn and Dreamcast if we cope hard enough. Maybe we could get Virtual Boy games? That library is absolutely tiny, but those games are kind of trapped there. If they just dropped most of the Virtual Boy library on the service and let you play it with a monochrome filter, that would be really nice. Outside of those, they could add Okay, hear me out. DS and Wii games could totally run on the Switch, and I think they could get them to work really well if they tried hard enough, but they're probably too lazy to do that. Still, I can dream. DS games could work perfectly fine with touch controls in handheld mode. They could also work while docked, but you would probably have to use pointer controls. A cool thing they could do would be to let you connect another Switch via local play in order to do things Wii U style, I guess. The problem with DS games that would be weird to solve would be the mic. I don't know how they would go about that. As far as I know, the only DS games on Switch are third-party ones like Ghost Trick, The World Ends With You, and some other ones, so Nintendo might be interested. The Wii is a little different. We have proof that Wii games can work perfectly fine on Switch in the form of Mario Galaxy and 3D All-Stars and Skyward Sword, but they would have to figure out how to handle the different control schemes for some games. I don't think they actually want to add the Wii to NSO though. We have had several Wii games come out on the Switch. Xenoblade Chronicles, Skyward Sword, Mario Galaxy, and Kirby's Return to Dreamland have had ports or remasters made for Switch. They'll probably remaster Metroid Prime 3 at some point. They'll definitely remaster or port other Wii games in the future, and that's probably enough for them. I don't know at this point, I'm just daydreaming now, none of this is ever happening. And that's where things would definitely end. They seem content to just remaster or ignore their 3DS games, and we have most Wii U exclusives of value on Switch anyway. The only worthwhile remaining ones are like Yoshi's Woolly World, Xenoblade Chronicles X My Beloved, and some digital-only titles like Pushmo World and the NES Remix games. Paper Mario Color Splash and Star Fox Zero as well, depending on who you ask. All the other games either rely too heavily on the gamepad or are just a little bit bad. So what should the schedule for all of this be? I don't know, you figure it out. I really hope that one day we'll get some massive Switch Online update where many games are added and GameCube support comes and nice stuff like that. I don't think that day will ever come though. I do think that Nintendo can save this service. If they make proper changes, add a lot of great games, and constantly give new reasons for people to use it, it will be worth the price of admission. I just unfortunately don't have faith that they will do any of these things, so for now we're just stuck with an underwhelming subscription model. That's just sad.